okay, I proffered $15,000, but I really now want to make it $12,000, or I proffered to pay it at this point in time, and now I want to delay payment and pay it at a different point in time. You can now go back and reconsider that request without having another public hearing.
Okay, now, I'm not even considering anybody going down, but if they want to go up, I'll be happy to consider them. I'm not considering anybody going down under any circumstances.
It doesn't really specify. I mean, this is frankly not a very well-drafted statute. When you look at the phrasing of such amendment does not affect the conditions of use or density. Well, what's a condition of use? That's very, very vague.
Okay. All right.
But what it does is it gives you the flexibility to consider an amendment to an existing proffer without having to go back through the entire process and hold another public hearing. It allows you to waive the public hearing if you wish to do so. If you don't wish to do so, you can still have the public hearing.
Okay. Maybe if you're going to go down and you're going to say, okay, I'm going from 15 to 12, and I'm going to build you a new school, then you can go down.
Sure.
That's my opinion. But, all right, I'm going to let Mr. Seeley go.
Anything else, Mr. Seeley?
No, I guess my concern is that paragraph in this, and even with clarification from legal, now it's even more suspicious to me because it's untested, it's new, and it's vague. So I guess it makes me even more suspicious. So my objection to any of this is actually this paragraph, and I understand the connection fees, and I can understand actually allowing those at the time of the meter set being done, but other than that, I think some of this is uncharted waters for any community. I think we don't need to be first in that.
Mr. Roselle?
On the, first of all, on the utility plan, had we basically, over time, I don't see where it'd be a big difference in lost revenue. Primarily, it'd just be getting the revenue at a later time. Same revenue, just set back. Primarily, is that pretty much correct on that? All right.
At the most, it would be 90 days.
Okay.
Difference.
All right.
Mr. Rose, if you don't mind if I interrupt for just one moment.
Absolutely.
I have a question kind of on that lines. If we change the availability fee at some point as a board, how does that affect the 90-day payment? Because that's the concern I have with it. In other words, if we change the availability fee and it's immediate on, say, July 1st, and this person's already agreed to pay, say, $6,000 or whatever it was, and then we've changed it to $10,000, you know, do they pay the heavier fee, or do they pay the previous fee they agreed to?
If they've already been issued the permit, I think as part of your motion, you would want to clarify that it does not apply to previously issued permits.
Okay.
I think as a cautionary note, you would want to make that statement. I think practically speaking, that's how it would be applied. Okay. But you know, as a cautionary note, I would think that you would want to clarify that.
Okay.
John.
I know in other jurisdictions that basically require it by the time the meter's set. The developer still has the option to pay any time up until then to actually make the payment. It's simply that's the last date that it's due. And so you will see in a lot of jurisdictions, if they advertise that they are going to increase availability fees, there will be a number of people come in to try to actually make payments prior to the effective date, okay, so that they're in before that day, and they don't have to, because again, there's nothing to hold them from paying it prior to that. That's just the deadline for it.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is that the availability fee is the availability fee at the time of the 90-day ending period.
As long as that's the way that it is approved, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Roselle, any other questions?
Yeah, I was just, I think I was hearing that, I don't know, it was Spotsylvania or someone that was recently using this or something like this. Do you know of any other counties that have put this into place?
Spotsylvania County, in my discussions with their planning director, they specifically are evaluating changes to the proffer amount, going from a CI, as I understand it, a CIP-based number to a level of service number, which has resulted in an actual decrease in the cash proffer value, okay? They have also specifically approved one rezoning where the cash proffer was less than the revised suggested cash proffer value. And those were the significant changes that they have looked at. Stafford County has not, from my discussions with the director there, the board has not made any specific changes in terms of the development process in that county. There have been some discussions, but staff has not prepared specific amendments for the board to consider.
But we know Pennsylvania is using this specific statute.
I don't know if they're using this specific statute. I can check with the director there. I'm not sure they have made that amendment, Mr. Roselle.
All right, and then the other one on the, for the public hearings, we would still have, for each event, there would be a new public hearing for any, if we had an existing proffer, and it was changed, we still had to have a public hearing where all the citizens would read about it and be able to speak on it.
Any new rezoning application, you still have the public hearing. These amendments to the state code don't relieve you of that. It gives you the flexibility after the public hearing has started, as I said, to negotiate. And secondly, a separate statute is the one that gives the board the flexibility in terms of whether to require another public hearing. I share.
Right, currently, we don't have the flexibility of another.
No, right now you would have to go through the full public hearing process at both the commission and the board.
But this would give us opportunity, the flexibility on the same.
Yes, and you have to make the decision.
Okay.
The board has to make the decision upon application as to whether to waive that public hearing or not.
Okay. All right, that's all the questions I have.
Thank you. I have had a couple of developers come to me and say, in terms of, the issue has been, they have been able to get money from the banks to build the houses. However, the banks have restricted the amount of money that they put out in the, as the house is constructed. So as Bobby or Mike indicated, generally they're going to use the first pot of money to get the foundations, they're going to use the first pot of money to get the preliminary building up, and then the second pot of money is to do something else, and the third draw is to finish the house out, and the fourth draw, or sometimes the third draw, they can get money to pay for these other charges that we have, these other costs. And what has been asked, and to be honest with you, my thoughts are, we can say, no, we're not going to do these things, and we can continue to not have any growth for the most part in the county. 100% of nothing is still nothing. That's the way I've always looked at it. If we can generate, and I think we owe it to the people of this county that have jobs that depend on building to sustain them, I think we owe it to them to do what we can to try to generate some activity in the building communities. this developer one of the developers has contacted me, a very strong developer. So if a very strong developer is having those type of issues with the bank, then what are some of the smaller developers, smaller builders, what kind of problems are they having with the banks and being able to draw? So it is not like we're giving anything away. At the end of the day, at the end of 90 days, or the meter being set, we will still collect the same amount of money that we would have collected now 90 days or 60 days or 70 days earlier. It is not like we're giving anything away. So I personally believe that it's in the best interest of the people of Caroline County and of Caroline County government to look at this particular issue. And I would personally like to see the board act on an emergency ordinance tonight, and then we discuss it for 30 days. I think it is the time limit the ordinance is good for. And then in the 30 days, if we decide, if the majority of this board decides that it's not good, then we let it die. But it certainly gives us a time to discuss the issue. It gives the developers a time to get going with their development, and we move ahead. As far as the profits is concerned, you know, maybe some of us don't realize what we negotiate profits every time we get together and talk about development. I mean, how many times have we back and forth with a developer here in board meetings? What are we doing? We're negotiating, and probably negotiating illegally, to be honest with you, but we're negotiating. So I think we need to try to protect ourselves on those issues the best we can. Again, we're not giving anything up. We've not said to any developer, or we're not saying to any developer, we're going to forgive you of what you have proffered to begin with. We're not saying that at all. All we're saying to them is the fact that, hey, we may waiver the public hearing, which will speed up the process somewhat, that we can give you some relief as to whether it's a 30-day relief or 60-day relief. We don't have to do that. We don't have to do any of those things. But I think the board needs the flexibility in dealing with these issues. There are probably some proffers that have been made to this board of rezonings that should have been cashed in on, that we haven't cashed in on. And I think you need to look into those things to see where they're at and why we haven't cashed in on them. So again, it is not like we're giving something away to the developers. I'm not a real big fan of the developers, but I do know they provide a livelihood for the people of Caroline County, for many people of Caroline County. I can tell you the church that I attend, at one time we had 17 families that had homes in foreclosure, and most of those people were either subcontractors or contractors. We cannot sit here and think that we're not being hurt by the housing industry. We are being hurt big time by the housing industry in Caroline County. So again, I've heard exactly what everybody has said. I agree that we do not want to give anything away to developers. I'm not advocating that at all. I'm only saying that in order to jumpstart the housing industry and the building industry, we may have to make some of these concessions for a short period of time. And I'm not saying this ordinance should be forever. We may want to put a time limit on it that's only good for the next 12 months or next 6 months or whatever the time frame is. There may need to be a sunset put on this particular provision. But I think that we need to seriously look at it and consider the emergency ordinance at this point and then determine whether it's benefiting us as a county. Mr. Puffett, you have a question?
Yes. Ben, can we put a sunset provision in this ordinance if we so chose? Okay. All right.
Are there any other questions? Is there a motion or to, and we, I think the 30 days. But I think he's talking about when the ordinance is put into, when we go with the final ordinance, right? We can put a sunset provision that this ordinance will expire in 12 months. Okay. So we just need a motion to do the emergency or not to do it. Is there a motion to approve the emergency ordinance for the 30-day period on the availability? It does not apply to the proffers. It would not apply to the proffer provision. It would only apply to the availability provision. 60 days.
You're saying, excuse me, you're saying only the availability provision.
We could not make the emergency ordinance apply to the
zoning.
proffer provision.
That's correct.
Right.
I'll make the motion, Mr. Chairman, with the provision that, that when we come back for the public hearing on this particular item, that it includes a sunset provision.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion made by Mr. Popowitz, seconded by Mr. Rozell, that we approve emergency ordinance for availability fees only. And Mr. Popowitz's motion includes that when the ordinance that will address this issue for a longer period have a sunset provision in the ordinance. Discussion on the motion.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question, and
Go right ahead.
I'm watching Mr. Emerson's face, because to me, we're mixing apples and oranges when we start down this process of, we're going to vote for an emergency ordinance, but we're going to vote to have a sunset clause, and all, those two things are mutually exclusive at this point.
The emergency ordinance is good for 60 days. At the end
Right.
of 60 days, it will expire. If what Mr. Popowitz has said, when the ordinance, the amended ordinance comes back, or the ordinance establishing this provision comes back to the board, that there be a provision put into it that would create a sunset clause. It has nothing to do with the emergency ordinance, other than he is saying, when staff brings it back,
Except that it's in the motion. And
It-
the way I'm reading this, and maybe it's technical, but it's technical. You're voting on a 60-day ordinance, an emergency ordinance.
That's correct.
End of discussion.
correct.
So the sunset provision has no business in the motion at this point because it's not applicable.
It's not applying to the emergency ordinance. I can do a separate motion if you'd like.
Why don't you just withdraw that
Yeah,
as part of your motion?
I'd do it separately, or just make the request that a sunset provision be put in when we bring the other ordinance
Yeah,
back.
exactly.
Just be in
Just-
the
You can
motion.
always, when you
Okay.
get the permanent ordinance, you can always, if it doesn't have the sunset or it's not to your liking, you can.
Okay, I'll withdraw the motion and.
Agree?
Okay.
So
And,
you have another motion?
yes, I'll make a motion that we accept the emergency ordinance as presented by staff.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Popowitz, seconded by Mr. Rozell, that we approve the emergency ordinance for availability fees. Is there discussion on the motion?
Yes.
Mr. Seaver?
But I just wanted to clarify, by definition, an emergency ordinance is only good for 60 days.
Absolutely.
And unless there's any other action, the emergency ordinance will cease to exist at the end of 60 days.
That is
Right,
correct.
unless you go through the normal process of a public hearing and readopting it, and by readopting it, you could change it in
Yeah,
any
you
way
can
that you
modify it,
want,
yeah.
because it's been advertised and it's basically a new ordinance. It will expire under the
So-
Code of Virginia.
All we're really doing is saying for the next 60 days, any developer that comes to the county will not have to pay his availability fees until 90 days later in the process. That's all we're really saying, because that's the only thing we're
Or
doing.
the setting of the meter, whichever occurs first.
That's all this motion says.
That's all we're saying. I
Yes.
just want to make sure that's all we're saying, because
Mr.
I,
Seaver?
I just want to be clear. Somebody comes in tomorrow, gives you plans. He gets a building permit next week. The 60 days runs out. Where is that person?
He'd have to pay you at that point. Or he'd be in violation of the ordinance that is the current
The
ordinance.
permanent ordinance. So if you fail to act on the permanent ordinance, at that point in time, they are in violation of the permanent ordinance and would have to pay at that time. So you wouldn't have the 90 day, you wouldn't have, if it's 60 days, you wouldn't have, in theory, the additional 90 days, or until the setting of the meter. At that time, they would be in violation of the ordinance, and we would...
I just want us to all be clear so that we don't get a phone call and go, I'm in limbo. We're talking about it tonight. We all understand the same thing.
I would trust the staff will certainly have something permanent before this board within 30 days. I would hope it would not use the 60 days so that we'll know where we stand, whereas to the majority of this board is going to approve it, the ordinance amendment, or the new ordinance, or not approve the new ordinance, and we move on. Go ahead. You have another question?
And I guess where I'm at this point is when we bring back the new ordinance, are we also going to put in there the proper negotiation phrase?
I think that's,
It's separate. Go ahead.
I think that's a separate discussion,
Separate issue altogether.
Mr. Seeley.
Okay,
Yeah, that is a.
just making sure that we're on the
Strictly
same
deals
page.
with the availability fees and availability fees only. Even an ordinance coming back within 30 days, its availability has nothing to do with the problem.
Okay.
Any other discussion? All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion is carried, and the emergency ordinance is approved for 60 days. And we'd like to have something back within 30 days, Mr. Fincham, on this ordinance.
Yes, sir. We could actually have the draft for you at the next meeting,
That could be the
because
first reading.
you have your process of the first reading in order to meet that ultimate time frame, unless the board waives the reading requirements. I think we probably need to come back at the next meeting,
With the first reading?
Yes.
Okay. That'll be fine.
including the language as directed by the board.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fincham.
You want to discuss the second issue of the zoning amendment?
That has to do with proffers, right?
Yes, sir.
Probably we need
I'm not gonna go along with
to
proffers.
mull over that a little bit more.
Okay, that'd be fine.
And discuss that a little bit more.
The appropriate action at the time, if you decide to go forward, would be to refer the proposed amendment or amendment as modified to the Planning Commission, which it would then go through the normal public hearing process for a zoning text amendment.
To the Planning Commission, just look at it and see if it's anything to look at. It may be a good thing to do, is send it to the Planning Commission, because it's going to take some time at that level, and then it comes back to us. Nothing has to be approved, but at least we get the Planning Commission part of it away.
You could do it. I just have a fundamental issue with that, Mr. Chairman. If someone comes to us with a proposal and that proposal includes certain proffers, that's part of my reason voting for it. And then for them to come back and say, oh, what I said I was going to do before, I'm really not going to do, and haha, I got you. That's kind of just the way I feel about it.
Yeah, and I don't know that, well, I certainly am not in favor of looking at reducing proffers, the proffer dollars. Now, the proffers in Caroline County have gotten up to about $17,000, $18,000, $19,000, somewhere in that range, is it not?
Cash proffer value is $17,632.
Right. So I'm also saying that some smaller groups may have a problem coming with that up front. And it may take 60 days, it may take for the second draw from their banks in order to take care of that issue. But again, I am not for reducing any proffers at all. We need to, I'll agree 100%, hold their feet to the fire when it comes to the proffer amounts that they agreed, and we agreed to accept and they agreed to give. I have absolutely no problem with that at all.
Okay, well, let's
And I
mull
think
that
that's-
over a little bit.
I'm sorry?
Let's mull that one over a little bit
All right,
more before we go back.
Look at the next meeting, we'll decide whether we're going to send it to the Planning Commission or not send it to the
Okay.
Planning Commission. All right? Informational calendar items. Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to draw your attention to the capital projects update that's in your packet or on your screen. It's an update of the utility construction as well as the general capital construction of the various projects that are ongoing. Many of them are starting to wind down now, and we'll continue to give you those updates as we compile them. Also, Mr. Chairman, the only calendar item that I have is tomorrow evening at 5:30. There'll be a public reception for the the newly appointed fire EMS chief. That will be over in the emergency services part of the building. It precedes the monthly meeting of the Emergency Services Commission. Everyone is invited to attend and meet the new fire EMS chief. And
Thursday.
he will begin his new responsibilities here in Caroline on August the 17th. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, on our capital projects, the one that I don't see is the sheriff's office renovation, and I was curious where we were in the scope of the cost of that.
That's Mr. Pardon, you have a comment on the compilation of the sheriff's renovation? I know the motion by the board was a not to exceed number of 30,000, and it started out being 30, but
I thought it was 43,000.
33.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe we've paid any bills on that yet, but we can get you a report email tomorrow, and then we'll add it to the next report from here on out and keep you up to speed on that.
Okay.
Closing comments, Mr. Popowitz?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Thomas?
And just to make sure that from the capital projects report, there's approximately $208,000 remaining in that particular budget that the board had committed to try to renovate the old Commissioner Revenues building. Do we have any idea of the status? I know we'd asked to have some people come out and look at it and see what it would cost, so just to follow up on there, do we have any status on that yet?
Mr. Borshuk may have an answer for you.
Yes, we just had one of our engineering firms that we're dealing with now. They were out to look at the building, today's Tuesday, yesterday, and we got just a preliminary report on their initial walkthrough, and we will be getting a full report back from them based on their evaluation and what they're going to come up with for an estimate on cost for that.
Kind of ballparkish? $210,000, because that's the only amount of money we have.
It's not going to come to that. Now, in fact, some of the things that we thought we would have to address from a structural perspective, they are indicating that they don't think it's going to be a problem, so I think it's going to be less than what initially we had thought, because some of the structural issues can get a little pricey.
Okay. Thank you, sir. If you could let me know when you meet with them next, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. That was it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
No, sir.
Comments? Mr. Rosales?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Can I clarify just something that the board, I think, needs to understand that Mr. Thomas raised? As you recall, the borrowed amount for the Union Bank shares renovation was $4 million. The budgeted amount for the renovation ended up being $3.4 million. So the $200,000 that you're speaking of, Mr. Thomas, is up to the 3.4. And that would leave approximately $400,000 remaining because we had to make an interest payment on that borrowed amount. So you're not talking about $200,000 in question, you're talking approximately $600,000.
Thank you very much.
Just for future clarification.
Okay.
It doesn't mean we're going to spend all of it.
That's correct.
I do want us to get started.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a motion, have a motion to go into closed meeting?
Which one? Number 2? Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we go into closed meeting for consultation with legal counsel and briefed by staff. Exemption Section 2.2-3711A7 Code of Virginia to discuss legal matters requiring the provisions of legal advice by counsel involving negotiations of a cable contract with MetroCast Communications and actual legal proceedings involving a private utility company in the county. That's my motion.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Rozell, seconded by Mr. Popowitz, and you heard the motion that we're going to go into closed meeting under. Discussion on the motion. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion is carried, and the board will enter closed session. Is there a motion to come out of closed meeting?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Rozell, seconded by Mr. Popowitz, that we come out of closed meeting. Discussion on the motion. All in favor, by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The motion is carried. Mr. Popowitz, do you certify that we only discussed in closed meeting the items that we indicated we were going to closed meeting for?
Aye, so certified.
Mr. Thomas?
I so certify.
Mr. Seeley?
I so certify.
Mr. Rozell?
I so certify.
And I so certify as well. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.